And speaking of fundamentals, we still have another rebuttal discussing the digital dollar. And this is coming from CoinDesk. And it says a digital dollar may help the poor, but it's far from a done deal. Financial inclusion is one of the big reasons the U.S. should adopt a digital currency, supporters say, but others aren't so sure. Advocates for a digital dollar in the U.S. point to many possible benefits, such a currency. There we go. Saying it would lead to greater financial inclusion, allow for more efficient distribution of government benefits, and provide a faster and cheaper way to send money overseas. But the issue of whether to have a digital dollar is far from settled. Although a digital dollar may have received a boost earlier this month when President Joe Biden issued an executive order that asked federal agencies to study the issue. Now, remember, we also basically have two forms of the digital dollar. We have one by the Federal Reserve and one by, now I forget, but it's called eCash. And they're competing ideas. Both of them have, each have individual flaws, right? So the digital dollar's flaw, both of them share the same major flaw, which is a further centralization of the control of finances to the federal government. They both share that same flaw. But one, in the case of the digital dollar right now, is studied by MIT, which is kind of slated as the digital dollar, would also have issues of basically programmable money and the ability for whoever controls it, whichever federal government controls it, to dictate what basically users can and can't buy and control their accounts kind of directly. While on the eCash side, they've gotten rid of that. However, their big problem is going to be that they do not have, they're proposing basically a digital currency that does not have a public ledger. So basically, you have no way to review as part of the public. And that's one of the things that makes Bitcoin important. So as far as the two options, neither one seem really good to me, but there are basically competing ideas within that. And I think the eCash one would be further centralized as well because it pulls the control out from the Federal Reserve and goes directly into the federal government. One, not so directly into, yeah, anyways, I think you understand what I'm saying. One example of how the digital dollar could have helped occurred when the U.S. government issued stimulus checks as a form of COVID-19 relief. Crypto enthusiasts claim that instead of issuing checks, an easier and faster way to send the money to people would have been to simply airdrop digital dollars. A digital dollar could deliver public benefits from the government in a much more efficient manner than the current system. What happens when the government can be more efficient at printing more money? Inflation? Okay. So, and that's according to Brianna Marbury, executive director of the nonprofit Interledger Foundation. With COVID relief payments, the government was scrambling to get checks distributed, and in some cases, it didn't even have the right addresses for people who had moved. In other cases, people weren't registered with the IRS because their income was below the threshold required to file taxes. Quote, they were just up in arms and couldn't figure out how to get these checks to people in a fast and efficient way, and it was just something that was very needed at the time. Similar difficulties arose with the $2.2 trillion CARES Act for small to medium business and farmers. With a CBDC, every person would have been issued a digital wallet that would allow them to direct access to their funds, avoiding those obstacles, some crypto enthusiasts claimed. In fact, lawmakers had proposed that the Federal Reserve issue a digital dollar in March of 2020, but ultimately decided for direct bank deposits. Jim Kuna, an official at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, said a digital currency could be one part of a solution to address an issue that's bigger than just distributing government funds. That issue is including more people in the financial system. Quote, if you want to help solve financial inclusion, you'd have to have a public policy goal of doing that, end quote, Kuna said. A new technology by itself is not going to fix financial inclusion. just like it's not going to fix cross-border. I'd argue that it already has started to fix financial inclusion in places like Venezuela, and that is something on the international scene that we've already seen happening, and I think that it can happen across everything without actually the interference of a government or anything along those lines. We've seen plenty of use cases around that, but let's continue. Quote, one little use case, and you can see how CBDC would have some potential, is oversimplifying it, Kuna said, but it shows you the potential. We just haven't built on that yet. In the US, roughly 35% of low-income individuals open up bank accounts just to receive government funds. That number includes only those who qualify for opening a bank account, not people who want to but don't have the ability to do so. Some 7.1 million people, or 5.4% of the US population, are unbanked. And when including the underbanked to count those who don't have access to mainstream financial services like credit cards and loans, the number goes up to 14 million. Many of them are immigrants who send remittances overseas to their home countries, which is often an expensive service. Quote, they can either send that extra amount to their family and friends back home, thereby increasing their economies, or even just being able to put that into their own pockets, end quote, which has clearly already been being done with cryptocurrency. It's one of the first things that started being done with cryptocurrency, was avoiding all these things like Western Union and so on. If the Federal Reserve were to issue a CBDC, it would probably charge much lower fees on remittances than private companies do, she added. Senator Sherrod Brown, I believe a Democrat of Ohio, chairman of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, has made a similar point, saying, quote, Americans shouldn't have to pay exorbitant fees just to use the money they've already earned. A central bank digital currency can work with these no-fee accounts to make sure working families have access to the payment system and full participation in our economy, end quote, Brown said at committee hearing last September. Some say while the digital currency could help low-income families and individuals, the details of a digital dollar need to be fleshed out. Quote, CBDCs could have a great impact on fiscal policy, particularly for those in need, end quote, said Jennifer Lassiter, executive director at the Digital Dollar Project. But we will not know for sure to what extent positive or negative impacts CBDCs would have if we do not experiment on the specific use cases. A report earlier this month from Brookings Institution, written by Tim Masad, a former chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and Hal Jackson, a Harvard Law School professor, said that instead of getting the Fed involved, quote, the Treasury Department could relatively quickly create digital accounts to provide payment services that would be especially valuable to unbanked and underbanked individuals. Yeah, they could, I guess, in theory, work with Ripple. But yeah, they could utilize what's already currently available with Bitcoin or Digibyte or whatever else, right? That's what other countries have already done. There's no consensus that a digital currency is necessary. Lawmakers and banks have been focusing on the issue of financial inclusion for years, and new products and services that are internet or phone-based have already led to more financial inclusion, said Scott Talbot, a lobbyist for the Electronic Transactions Association, a group that represents big financial institutions like JP Morgan Chase, MasterCard, and PayPal. Talbot pointed to examples like being able to pay with cash from any location and eCash, an electronic dollar that is issued by the Treasury Department and has similar characteristics to a CBDC. Rather than creating a whole new system, it would be more efficient to continue with the current one and make tweaks to accommodate the CBDC, he suggested. Quote, if we're talking about creating a whole new system where the Fed creates a new rail or a new car or something, that's a lot of effort to try to mimic what we already have, Talbot added. If the government decides to pursue a digital dollar, it would still take years for it to be issued. Some decision makers are eyeing the latter half of this decade. Quote, yes, there are some challenges with implementation, Marbury said, but let's experiment, let's break this thing, and let's see where our vulnerabilities are so that we can begin to create a system that works for everybody and that does not exclude certain populations of the American people. You have it. It's called Bitcoin. It's already here, bro. The thing is you don't control it. So I get the reluctance. I understand. I understand, my man. But it's already here. We already have something to handle it. Let's integrate that and move on. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Crypto Mining Morning Show every Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. Pacific and 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. You can check out more clips here, or if you're interested in checking out the entire live show, you can check that out down here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.